Hello, friends. Hello, friends. A tradition unlike any other.
Oh, my goodness. In your life, have you seen anything like that?
There it is! Adam Scott, a life changer. Mashed potato!
Here it comes.
This is the 19th Tee podcast. Kieran Marsh, Nathan Drudy back with you. Dritster, I'm back in the dungeon. You'll see and you'll notice for those watching on the YouTubes, I've done a little bit of work in the last fortnight of decorating, and that is I've just popped over my right shoulder, left of your screen, my kit, courtesy of our great friends at Cobra Puma Australia. So still a fair bit to come, I think, in terms of decorating the back wall, but the podcasting studio / shed is in full force at the new abode. Look, we're at the beginning of, I think, comfortably the best week on the biennial golfing calendar, not to be confused with the biannual golfing calendar, because it doesn't happen twice a year. In fact, it happens once every 2 years, the biennial golfing calendar. I speak, of course, of Ryder Cup week. We will get to the Ryder Cup briefly now, and then again at the back end of the episode, but just your thoughts and feelings, because I know, like me, this is right up there, if not the best thing in golf for you as well.
It's very exciting. First and foremost, welcome back. It has been a little bit of time between drinks in the last couple of months. I think we've only put out a couple of episodes where we've actually been together and we've had some time off. So it is nice to be back. Of course, Ryder Cup this weekend, Solheim last week, Aussie Tour officially back as of next week. So exciting time first and foremost. It's very, very cool. I'm excited that this is where we are in the calendar of golf. I mean, it's been one that we've looked forward to for such a long time now. It seems like an eternity ago, the last Ryder Cup. And I think if the Solheim Cup was any indication of what we've got in store, then it's going to be a really, really exciting few days in Italy. The content's starting to pump out on the Instagram from on the ground over there. So no, it's a very exciting time, Marshy. Looking forward to it. The weather's going to be great over there, and I'm certainly excited to see the Ryder Cup. Apologies for the audio issues as well. If anyone can tell the difference, Marshy has a professional microphone. I have the MacBook Pro microphone that has a $15 dock connection from Kmart. Pay to play, Kmart. But your docks suck and my microphone won't connect. So thanks so much, team at Kmart.
Welcome your thoughts and feedback, Kmart Australia. You do mention what a week we're into to be bookended by two great team events. So we will get to a comprehensive look at the Ryder Cup at Marco Simone Golf Club there in Rome shortly, but we must look back and reflect on what was an enthralling Solheim Cup over the weekend. Of course, similar to our efforts in this year's Ashes, it ended in a retention as opposed to a clean victory. So 14 points apiece for the European women, and the American women means that as the holders of the Solheim Cup, Europe retained. But Drew, it certainly didn't look that way off the back of the first morning. The Americans, unbelievably, for the first time in their history, went 4-0 in the first session of foursomes, a format they are traditionally poor at. And away from home, of course, the event in Spain, they raced out of the blocks. And it was only probably a handful of outstanding performances by people and women on that European team who are carving out a reputation in these team events. I speak of people like Leona Maguire, who only bolstered what is an exceedingly high reputation in team golf. Carlota Saganda, playing at home as a Spanish woman in front of a home crowd, was exceptional, and then probably really headlined by the Swede Caroline Hedwall on the final day, having sat the entire competition to come out in singles, be 3 down with 6 to play, and birdie everything home to get over the top of Ali Ewing, I believe. It was a phenomenal European performance. People might say it's hyperbolic and we might be overstretching because they weren't clear victors, but from where they were on Friday morning to be 4-0 down, to drag it back to 8 apiece at the beginning of Sunday singles, and then to stare down the barrel because it wasn't looking good. I think at one stage the Americans might have got out to an 11 to 9 or 11-8 lead in the singles. To draw it back, really headlined by Caroline Headwall there at the end, was a quintessentially European performance in team golf.
Yeah, well, you're spot on, and I think your comp at the top about the Ashes is spot on, because I was going to say the same thing. Like, the Americans are losing their shit over a retention. I mean, wait till they find out about how we retain the Ashes this year, and we're all doing rain dances here in Australia. I mean, wait until they understand how the Ashes works. But no, I think your analysis is spot on, Marshy, and Carlotta Saganda to go 4-0-0 is exceptional. And again, people like Lynn Grant, who probably has got a little bit lost in all of the hype of, someone like Caroline Headwall, as you said, rightly getting a lot of attention, and Leona Maguire going through beautifully as well. I mean, Lynn Grant went 3-2-0, so she delivered a really good performance. She claimed 3 points alongside Leona Maguire. So, yeah, I mean, even on the second day after the morning foursomes, the US were up 7-5, as you rightly pointed out, and to make up 2 points in that next session, or win 3 points and make up the 2-hole difference in that next session, really set things alight and made Sunday what it was, really. So that afternoon 4-ball by the Europeans, in which they won 3 of the 4 matches, was really the thing that lit the candle under them and got them ultimately back in the contest, because for a while there, it didn't look great. You're right, it definitely didn't look great. And Leona Maguire and Charlie Hull go out and beat Corder and Ewing in resounding fashion in the afternoon 4-ball, and that kind of sets things alight. Anna Nordquist and Headwall, unfortunately, they lose their afternoon 4-ball, but the rest of them have played solid golf, and all of a sudden it's 8-all going into Sunday. And, as they say in the business, Marshy, you couldn't script it going into the third and final day of singles. And what a third and final day it was.
It was certainly ebbs and flows, I think it would be fair to say as well, Druids, because there were some players. I know you mentioned Charlie Hull went out and won a point there with Leona Maguire earlier in the weekend, but on balance, herself, Celine Boutier, who's been in outstanding form coming in, they were quite disappointing across the entire weekend, and they were 2 people probably on the run in where you would have thought they'd be an absolute barometer for the European team. So I think you look at, I suppose, players standing out and having those victories that you don't necessarily expect. I mean, Headwall is the headline there, as I said, to be 3 down with 6 to play and end up beating Ali Ewing 2 up is actually outrageous. But for me, it's it's probably those last 2 as well, because Headwall ensured that the European campaign had life into those last few games. Without her, undoubtedly, it's over. But you look at Maya Stark, who ends up winning 2-1 over Alison Corpuz, who's won a women's major this year. Like, she's a major winner this year, Corpuz. Doesn't get much better. And then Saganda, to your point, 4-0, but stared down Nelly Corder, who it's the best golf I've seen Nelly Corder play in a long time across the course of probably the weekend, particularly in patches without necessarily being overly consistent. But that singles game, she was a real nuisance for Carlotta Saganda. And nothing, Carlotta Saganda is a Spanish woman playing in Spain in front of a Spanish crowd. Like, Nelly Corder was pushing shit uphill, to be honest, from the first tee. And she pushed it all the way. It wasn't until Saganda, put a tee shot on the par 3 17th to, stuffed it to 2 foot that you thought, okay, she's probably shut the door here. But it was a contest that went literally the entire way. Obviously, Lexi Thompson ends up winning that finals singles matchup over Emily Pedersen to level it at 14 apiece. But to your point, in terms of scripting, you can't ask for much more than for a team competition to come down to those last handful of singles games like we saw on a Sunday afternoon in this year's Solheim Cup. It was brilliant theatre.
I just want to pick up on a point you mentioned before about the 4 balls and the foursome. So obviously, as you rightly mentioned, the foursomes are traditionally not the US's best part of their game. You mentioned they went out 4-0 and rightly so. The four ball was fascinating to me because they actually won one match in the four balls across the 2 days. And that came on the Saturday when Knight and Yin beat Nordqvist and Headwall. That's the only match they actually won. The rest of them, Europe either won or halved. So on the first day, Zhang and Kang and Kupcho and Corpuz, they managed to get half a point. But that was just fascinating to me because it's not necessarily there, it's not necessarily something that we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing that being a little bit more close than what it was, and that was just a domination by the European team. So I thought that was worth just calling out as well. Were there any other sort of standout performances that you thought from any players? I mean, maybe obviously we've spoken about Headwall and Saganda going 4-0-0. Were there any players on the US team that you thought were maybe highlights, or maybe players that delivered not as what you were expecting?
Look, I'm reticent to go too hard here because, and we'll talk a lot about it, I think, when we turn our attention to the Ryder Cup, but it was further reinforcement for me that match play is an entirely different animal, and one that there's literally no marker to draw a comparison to outside of these tournaments. So when I look at someone like a Ro Zhang, who's burst out of college with arguably the greatest college golf career, male or female, we've ever seen, wins her first tournament as a professional.
Also, one I wanted to call out, Celine Boudier as well, went without scoring a point, which was interesting because she's arguably one of the best 10 players on the ladies tour at the minute. So yeah, further recognition that match play is definitely not the same as stroke play.
And the only other one, Drew, that I probably will call out for an American side is Lexi Thompson. And this is a player who, irrespective of whether it's in team golf for the US, herself as Lexi Thompson in particularly in majors, a player that comes under immense scrutiny in the women's game. Is a bit of a lightning rod, polarizes opinions. I don't think she helped to cause much at all. At a press conference over the weekend where she was asked a pretty standard question after completely duffing a critical chip, I think it was on 15, and was asked about that in the post-round presser and didn't handle it overly well. Stacey Lewis, as the team captain, handled it even more poorly than the player did. But to her credit, put that to one side, Thompson played her absolute arse off this weekend, and she has nothing, I think, to take away other than pride out of the way in which she represented the US, to the point that she prevented all the way to the very end a clean victory for the Europeans. So I thought Lexi Thompson on the course, in an environment there would have been a lot of pressure, because I can guarantee you, had she, got 1 point or half a point or no points, she would have been right at the top of the list to take the criticism, as she often is. So to her credit, in that cauldron-like environment, she certainly produced.
Yeah, I thought the press conference was pretty poor, to be honest. I mean, I think in what was a critical moment, if it had just been like on the first hole or something, I could maybe understand it. But given that it was coming down the stretch, I thought it was pretty poorly answered. And if that's the area that we're going to delve into with athletes, just saying, she said, I don't need to answer that question. But what are we doing here? What's the point? What are we doing here? So yeah, I thought it was pretty average anyway. But anyway, that's Lexi. Lightning rod, as you said.
That'll do us for the Solheim Cup, Druids. We'll turn our attention to Marco Simone, the golf club just outside of Rome, where really the eyes of the golfing world will turn from this point forward, we have our first practice rounds happening as we're recording here Tuesday night Australian time for the Ryder Cup. Just probably your first thoughts on, I don't know if you've seen much of the course, but I spent a bit of time last night. Golf Digest are doing a wonderful job now, particularly around majors, but obviously they've extended this to the Ryder Cup of these flyover videos they do. It takes about 15 minutes, fly you over each of the holes. I highly recommend for anyone who just wants to come in with a tiny bit of context, because it's well worth your time. But for mine, the thing that stood out, the piece of land, I mean, it's kind of the centerpiece of the Marcus Simone Golf Club is a castle that is said to be from roughly the year 1000. So that kind of gives you the context of where we are. You know, we're just north of Rome, views back into Rome from parts of the course, in a place that is far, far older than this 18-hole golf course that finds itself there now. But stunning imagery of where we're going first and foremost. And by the looks of it, it's going to hold a capacity crowd.
I think, I agree. I think it's a really interesting course, and I'm fascinated still to see. I mean, we've probably got a really good sneak peek of it anyway, in terms of how the Europeans actually set it up, right? We know essentially what they're going to do, but I think I'm still fascinated to see what it looks like come that first tee shot. You're right. The piece of land is very interesting in and of itself. I think there's going to be an influx of drone footage this week, Marshy. I reckon there's going to be drone footage galore of backdrops of castles and vineyards and looking over Rome itself, and probably up-teen shots of all that Rome has to offer in terms of the Colosseum and all of the extra stuff they'll probably pump into it. But yeah, I think there's going to be stretches of the course that'll be challenging for players. I think it's a really good match play course. I've watched a little bit online about, people playing different matches there. I think there are going to be stretches that are going to determine matches, as there generally is at these courses that they go to. Obviously, it's hosted the Italian Open plenty of times, so it's not a course that we don't see on the rota, for example. We see it regularly, and I think that's good for us as fans, because we kind of know what we're getting. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting course, because it's I don't know. Italy's not this massive golfing country in my head. Maybe it is. I don't know. Could be totally wrong. But so I think it's really interesting that we've gone for the Ryder Cup there, given where we are going in the next few years. I think Adair Manor's the next European host, obviously in Ireland, and that's going to be massive. So I think it's a really interesting market that they've taken it to, and they've obviously taken it to the best course that they have in Italy. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the individual matches be determined by some particular holes anyway.
Just a little bit on the course briefly before we move on. So first built in the early 90s, redeveloped in 2018 with the specific intention of hosting a Ryder Cup. So bear that in mind when you're watching it, that this course was entirely redone 5 years ago with this competition in mind that we're going to see across the next 4 to 5 days. Almost as if to underline that point, the sixth hole, I believe I've got this correct, the sixth hole is the only hole that remains in its original place and original orientation from the 2018 redevelopment. So 17 other holes have either changed their location or direction, or both, in that redevelopment from 2018. So it has been entirely designed and entirely built to host a tournament like the Ryder Cup. Mm-hmm. So just have that in the back of your mind as you're watching this weekend. A couple of other things to bear in mind before we dive a bit deeper into the individuals and potential pairings, and ask a couple of questions here, Drew. So the Americans have not won a European Ryder Cup, so a Ryder Cup on European soil, since 1993.
Yep.
Europe have won 4 of the past 6 competitions. However, and I stumbled across this stat today, which I thought was incredible, really, courtesy of Jamie Kennedy. That's Jamie R. Kennedy on Twitter. Does a fair bit of work in the digital space with Golf Digest. So the Ryder Cup became what we know as the modern-day Ryder Cup between USA and Europe in 1979. In the time since, so 44 years of competition, there have been a total of 588 matches in the Ryder Cup. The current aggregate score is Europe 295 and a half to the USA's 292 and a half. So there's 3 points in it of more than 500, almost 590 matches over 44 years of competition. There currently sits 3 points the difference aggregately. So take it with a grain of salt about haven't won on European soil since 1993. They've probably got the best team they've had since 1993 going in the US to play on European soil. Take it with a grain of salt. The Europeans won 4 of the last 6 because this shapes, with that last stat in mind, as another incredibly close Ryder Cup.
It does. And it's funny because I think back to this time before Whistling Straits and we were saying a very similar thing, right? This is going to be close. This is going to be great. And then it was one of the great blowouts. But I think this time it is genuinely going to be closer. And I think the fact that it's in Europe helps. If this was on US soil, I'd be thinking that the Europeans are in trouble. But it does. It's probably the most talked about Ryder Cup that I can remember in the last handful that have gone around, just with all the narratives in terms of players who have been picked. You know, JT came in, you know, you got guys like Ludwig Aberg who are in. Obviously the live guys are kind of on the outer, particularly on the European side of things. There's so many different little storylines that will go along the way. And I was kind of thinking about the whole live piece where, you know, guys like Poulter and Westwood, they weren't eligible, and Sergio Garcia, you know, allegedly coming to the party at the 11th hour and wanting to pay his fine to be able to play the Ryder Cup and things like that. Maybe this is a bit of a blessing in disguise for the European team that they've had to be, or it's forced their hand to pick some of these guys like Abergs, maybe like your Nikolai Horgards or your Sepp Strakers, who maybe wouldn't have been there otherwise. And maybe this is actually going to force them into, you know, some longevity. Maybe it is a blessing in disguise. I'm not too sure what your takeaway is on that. But I think on paper it looks really unbalanced. I personally think it does look really unbalanced to the US. But I think the fact that it's in Europe, I think that brings the European team right back into the equation. If it was in the US, I'd be very worried. I don't know what your takeaways are there.
No, I tend to agree. Certainly, I think traditionally speaking, and you could probably look across probably those last 6 Ryder Cups of which Europe have won 4, that the Americans always tend to look the best on paper. And increasingly it's about, and we spoke about Caroline Hedwell having a quintessentially European team performance in the Solheim Cup. Increasingly, it's become about those, without trying to sound disrespectful, bottom 4 players.
Yeah.
Because the top 8 of a European side are always red hot, but it's those bottom 4 players. And can the captain and the assistant captains and the system around the European team draw the best out of them when it matters? Mm-hmm. And that's what it's kind of been about. And you look back, I mean, obviously it was a really tough Ryder Cup for Podrick Harrington. But traditionally, someone like a Paul McGinley did it, you know, and did it so well. And that's been, I think, the cornerstone of European victories, because they've been increasingly data-driven, but more often than not, it will come down to who can be the player. And there's a lot of question marks over guys in that European team, no doubt. And you say someone like a Nikolai Højgaard has probably been picked for 2 years' time, when his brother Rasmus will probably join him on the team as well. And it's this is a guy who's probably going to play 5 Ryder Cups. So let's get him started on home soil rather than throw him to the Wolves over in America. But I think that's what it's going to be about, Drews, because it tends to always be about that. It's about, can those 4 or 5 guys on the European team produce their very best golf when the Bunsen burner gets turned up, particularly in singles. Like, it's a different beast when you've got your partner there, and there's a lot of good players on that European side that, Luke Donald has at his disposal to strategically partner with people. Mm-hmm. But when you get out into the cauldron of a singles game and you're staring down your US opponent, what's Nikolai Højgaard got in him and what Sepp Straka got in him. And I'm particularly excited to see what Ludwig Aberg's got in because I think there's a lot of excitement there. But look, undoubtedly, I think the US is stronger on paper. One thing I did note of interest today. So 8 of the 12 members of the US team have never played a Ryder Cup on European soil. So you're talking about guys like Scotty Scheffler, Patrick Cantlay. Like, these are guys, Colin Morikawa is a 2-time major champion. He's won a British Open, but he's never played a Ryder Cup. And, Colin's memories of the incredibly polite crowds at the Open Championship who embraced him with warm open arms as the champion golfer of the year. That's not what he's going to get on the first tee at Marco Simone. It will be feral. And I just think that that's a factor that plays undoubtedly. I mean, the crowd's going to play into the Europeans' favour anyway, but the fact that 2/3 of the American team have never been exposed to that environment, I think is going a little under the radar at present.
That's very fair. I think that is a good point, and maybe that's one of the reasons that they picked JT in amongst all of this is for a little bit of experience, and maybe that's something that's been overlooked that you've just brought to my thinking there. Where do you want to start? I was going to throw to you. Do you want to just give me a score prediction straight up, and then we can discuss why we've gone that way? Early days. Do you have a score prediction off the top of your head that you've got kind of floating around? It doesn't have to be bang on the number. You can give me a range if you like. So obviously 28 points up for grabs. Yeah.
So I do think the Europeans will win. I truly do.
Okay.
However, I like I'd be a blowout either way. I can't see the Americans blowing it out either. But if the Europeans are going to get across the line, which I do believe, I think it's kind of in that 15-13 range.
So 15-13. I like that.
That's me.
Okay.
That's me. What about you?
I'm pretty close. I had 16-12 written down. So I don't know. I've went back and forth on this a long way because I could see both ways. I could see Europe 16-12. I could see the US 16-12. So 16-12 for me is where I'll go as well. Where do you want to go next? How do you want to go? How do you want to dissect this a little? Because obviously we could go through every player, but who has the time?
I don't think we should, because I know we want to get to a little bit of football chat at the end as well, as is our want at this time of year. I said to you I had a couple of questions because obviously it feels like a major, but the traditional questions we ask in our major previews don't apply to team golf. So I suppose where I might start is the person who you think comes into this week under the most pressure. Who do you think that is?
Do you want one from each side, or do you just want me to give you the person?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've probably got two people in my mind.
Okay.
So and they are split across both sides. So let's go one on each team.
Well, I think for me, it's in the US side, it's JT. I think that's probably largely universal at the minute. I mean, he was the most controversial pick on that team, and I think he does have something to prove as to why he's been picked. His form's been awful coming in. I think to your point, he's been selected based off his, experience. It's definitely not off his current form. So I'll give you JT from that side. I do think there is an element of pressure on. Well, there's always going to be pressure on guys like Rory McIlroy, right? Like there's always going to be question marks about Rory. So I do think that's an easy answer. I think there's also pressure on someone like a Ludwig Aberg, for example. He's coming in. He's not played in a major before. He only turned pro a couple of months ago. I think my answer here is Jon Rahm. I think he is truly the barometer of this team. He has to have a winning record, and he has to go. He's going to play pretty much every session, if not every session. So he needs to have a really good weekend or 3 days to help lift this European side over the line. Not only does he have to play well, but he's got to pair up and play well. So they're probably going to pair him, with one of these younger guys that are less experienced in a Ryder Cup, Striker, Horgard, Aberg, whatever. So yeah, I think I'll give you that. I'll give you JT and John Rahm as my two players under the gun at the minute.
We mentioned. I'll get to that in a moment, but I'll just mention we mentioned the pairings and the fact that we've got our first practice rounds literally underway as we're recording here on Tuesday night. I think it's worth mentioning just on the back of your point around John Rahm, and also about the point that we said around Luke Donald needing to be really strategic about who he matches his blue chippers with. So if we look at the US, who they're sending out their 4 balls in practice rounds this morning. So the first group of 4 is Jordan Spieth, Patrick Cantlay, Xander Schauffele, Justin Thomas. I don't think there's any surprises there.
No.
The second group of 4 is Colin Morikawa, Brian Harman, Ricky Fowler, and Max Homa. Probably slightly surprised there, only because, and it will be contextualized when I say the last 4. I really thought that Harman would probably end up with someone like Scheffler. But I understand the versatility that Scheffler is. There is no one you could put Scheffler, which would be a bad pairing. He is truly the absolute ultimate match play partner, Scotty Scheffler.
Yeah.
So maybe Brian Harman goes to Morikawa there because I can see probably, or maybe even Fowler. My concern with the Harman Fowler pairing for the US is length off the tee.
Well, I was just going to jump in there. Sorry, that's a really good point. I actually think Harman and Morikawa is a really good pairing because you lose distance off the tee with punter Harman, and I think what you lose with that, you make up with iron accuracy from Colin Morikawa. I think that's a really good pairing.
Which I think makes complete sense on paper. I would not at all be surprised to see Zach Johnson put Morikawa with Homa because they are literally best mates from Cal. So Zach Johnson's really deferred back to the Paul Azinger model of just get the guys who are comfortable playing with each other back together. So let's see how that plays out. And in the final 4 for the US, Scheffler, Koepka, Clark, and Burns. So we've seen Scheffler Burns together before in team competitions. And it wouldn't at all surprise me if Koepka and Wyndham Clark play together. So, look, I don't think there's too many surprises there from the US. The European groups this morning, interesting. Again, not too many surprises, but I think they probably send a few more telegraphs than the Americans do. So, the first group of 4 for the Europeans this morning out in practice: Fleetwood, Straka, Lowry, and McIlroy, which is interesting. Fleetwood, Straka, Lowry, and McIlroy. Interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah, I tend to think that it's probably, if I had to hazard a guess, I think the first group of 4 that go out for foursomes on Friday night, our time, will be Thomas Spieth up against Fleetwood McIlroy. I think that's going to be the first match we see. I'm just going to take a guess there because I think Lowry McIlroy I'd love to see, but I think it's probably going to be more Lowry Straka because you'll get Straka's length off the tee.
And I also think with Straka as well, pairing him with someone like Rory, this is obviously a debut for Straka, right? Ryder Cup debut, right? So you pair him with Rory. You've got huge crowds there anyway. You've got the emotion. You go and pair a dude who's a rookie with Rory, who's going to attract 2x the crowd. So I don't mind that. I don't mind that Striker Lowry.
I also think with Fleetwood, don't get me wrong, there'll be no person who gets a louder cheer on the first tee for the European team than Rory McIlroy.
Yeah,
but there's the ability to play alongside Rory and Tommy, given his form this year, but also off the back of 2019, he has lifetime Colts status as a European Ryder Cup player. So he will garner just as much admiration on that first tee, which I think is a great pairing. Just from an atmosphere perspective, to send off the Europeans and set a bit of momentum. So the second four going out in practice tonight, Australian time, John Rahm, Victor Hovland, Tyrrell Hatton, Ludwig Aberg.
Mm-hmm.
So again, for me, that's, I would think, although I don't know, because I would think maybe Rahm goes with Aberg, but Rahm and Hatton probably makes a little bit of sense too, and Hovland and Aberg. I don't know. That's a really interesting four for me. Really interesting four.
And obviously these aren't the official pairing, so
No,
could be all thrown out of the wind. But I think Rahm and Hatton are the two most passionate, politely emotional people that they've got on that list. So I think I would potentially lean towards Rahm and Hatton going together and leaving Hovland to go with Ludwig Aberg, just purely from it's someone like a Tyrrell Hatton who is so emotional about his golf game at times. Is that going to be too much for Ludwig? I think Victor Hovland's cool and calm nature is probably going to be a good thing for Ludwig Aberg, and they're both from that part of the world. So up
tend
the
to
north.
agree.
So whatever they call that part of the world.
Nordic countries,
that's it. Yeah,
I believe is the
yes,
phrase.
that's the one. Yes, that's what I was looking for.
And then the final four for the Europeans out in practice rounds, Tuesday practice rounds: Matt Fitzpatrick, Justin Rose, Robert McIntyre, Nikolai Højgaard.
Mm-hmm.
This one is the least clear to me, if I'm honest. And as we say, this is not necessarily a projection, but I would be. It's rare that this late in the game, Luke Donald will be playing ducks and drakes with these practice rounds that he's throwing out there. So you would think, to use an old Paul Azinger term, these would be the pods that they're operating in. There's probably not going to be a lot of crossover between the pods. So finding your natural partnerships there, I think there's few players coming in, and I love the man. So it is not set easily. But there are a few players coming into this competition with less form than Robert McIntyre. So that's a critical pairing, unless you intend to sit him for most of the time ahead of singles, which I highly doubt you do with someone like Robert McIntyre. Because I think paired correctly, I think he needs to play early to get himself into the competition, but he needs to be paired correctly. And this is enormous for Nikolai Højgaard. I would think Nikolai Højgaard, I could be wrong. He's not playing on the first session. He's not playing Friday morning European time. He may get out in the afternoon, but it also wouldn't be surprised to see him sit until Saturday. So, I would think it's probably Fitzpatrick, Højgaard, Rose, and McIntyre there. Is where I would think Donald goes, but that's of the three groups of four, that's the least clear to me, as I said.
I could also see a world in which Fitzpatrick and Rose are paired up as the two Poms. Together.
Absolutely. And Bobby and Nikolai sit until there's an obvious place to put them in.
I think so. Yeah. No, that's
wonderful.
Good. That was fun. We should have, if we had planned things better, we could have, put forward our actual projections and how we would have rolled the team out. But,
well, I think it's so.
This is what happens.
I'm fairly confident that Rahm is in the other group that goes on Friday morning. So whether that's maybe that's with Victor Hovland, or maybe it's with Tyrrell Hatton. But I think you if you got aces in your sleeve, you lead with your strongest cards. So I think McIlroy and Rahm are going off in the Friday morning session, not together, so they'll find their natural partners. And for the US, I think it's probably less clear because, again, Zach Johnson will want, I think he's desperate to get Justin Thomas onto the course because the pressure will only build further the longer that he sits. He needs to get out. He's only going to go out with one person, and that's his mate, and my mate, and everyone's mate. And then what he does with that second pairing, get the sense he probably looks to get Scheffler into the game early. But it's also hard to argue with putting Cantlay and Schauffele out together because they're exceptional in team golf. So, but Friday morning will be Friday evening, of course, Australian time, will be fascinating because it sets the tone. It doesn't decide everything, as we said. The US women were up 4-0 after that session in the Solheim Cup, and obviously ends up being a draw. But it sets such a tone for the remainder of the weekend. So
Great.
we will wait to see, obviously, further practice groupings as they come. But as we say, that's a really good projection when you see that first slot about give you an idea of how things are shaping up.
Yeah.
That's a really long way to come back to who I think's under the most pressure. So I think from the US side, I was probably with you in saying Justin Thomas until probably a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think I actually think he has the ability to be quite liberated by this because, as we said at the beginning of this episode, match play is there is nothing else like it. We can't point to anything across the last 12 months, particularly the last 6, where he's really fallen off a cliff to say, well, that's exactly the same as environment as what he's about to walk into in Rome.
Yeah.
You can only point back to how he's been, and I get the sense that it was a big influence on the decision to bring him. But I kind of feel like he walks in here and says, well, if I don't play well, I've played exactly how everyone expected me to. And yeah, I'll be disappointed. And yeah, I'll probably feel like I haven't contributed and possibly let the team down. But all I can do is play better than what I've been doing. I can really only go one way. I can play how I've been playing, or I can play my nuts off. I probably can't play much worse.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element of it being liberating for Justin Thomas. For mine, honourable mention to Zach Johnson, because I think there's a lot of decisions that Zach Johnson has made that have the potential to pay ultimate dividends or bite him in the ass. And I think it will be binary. I don't think it'll be in the middle. So honourable mention to Zach Johnson. I actually think it's Brooks Koepka. So been thinking about this a bit. The guy has proven time and time again that when it matters to him, when he cares, there are few, if any, who can run with him in the game. I just don't know how much this matters comparatively to majors because it's never really been clear. He's never really been the chest beater or the fist pumper or the roarer after dropping a putt. So it's hard to get a gauge on what the Ryder Cup means comparatively to turning up at Augusta or turning up for a PGA Championship, turning up for a US Open. He's coming off the back of just having a child, which we've seen that go one of two ways for golfers in the past. And he's the guy that everyone said he's got to be on. Yeah. He's got to be on, right? And that's because of what we saw in the first 2 majors of the year. And we've seen very little to write home about since. So I do feel as though it's a bit of a lightning rod as well because there's been some whispers in the last probably 2 weeks, courtesy of him winning 2 of the last 3 live events, that, maybe Bryson should have been considered. So he is the sole criteria and sole, I suppose, barometer for live in this whole competition. I just feel like there is a fair bit of pressure on Brooks to produce.
I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. And he is flying the flag for live, right? So he's the one. I think that's totally fair. Yeah, I do genuinely think he cares. I'd like to think that he cares. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I think that's a good one. I do like Brooks. I mean, there's a few others in that team that you could make a case for. I mean, Scotty Scheffler is, he's been so good. His putting's been awful, but so maybe there's a bit of pressure on Scotty. I don't know. There's pressure on Brian Harmon, who's probably got in off the back of one good performance. There's pressure on everyone, I think. But is there anyone from the European side that jumps out at you that's got the fire kind of breathing down them at the minute?
I liked what you said about John Rahm because I agree. I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure on him because I don't envisage a world in which he has a losing record and the Europeans win. But I do think it's Rory McIlroy because Rory definitely can't play the way he did 2 years ago in Europe wins.
Yeah.
So that much is clear.
Yeah.
I think the Europeans probably had a more balanced team and probably even on paper a slightly better team 2 years ago. And he did not turn up until he beat Xander in Sunday singles.
Yeah.
And obviously we track that back as probably the turnaround point and to what we've seen in the last 2 years, that Sunday at Whistling Straits, that was it. That was the fork in the road. But the 2 days prior, he was woeful. Yeah. And there's no way known that he can be that bad again across the course of 3 days cumulatively and the Europeans win. So I think that he is the leader of this team, and without him performing to the level that the fans expect, and not least of which he expects of himself, I can't see Europe winning. So yeah, I think it's Rory.
I think you're spot on with Rory, and I think John Rahm as well. To your point before, 15-13, you said to Europe, right? So
Yeah.
If that's, and I said 16-12 the same way. If Rory and Rahm don't fire, there's a very real possibility that we could be looking at 19-9, 18-10 sort of territory again. I think that's totally fair.
It's honestly my biggest concern for Europe, Druids, is that I look at the Americans and I can envisage a world in which Scotty Scheffler doesn't, in fact, have a great 3 days. But there are others who will step into the breach.
Yeah.
That Colin Morikawa doesn't have a great couple of days.
Yeah.
There are players there who I think, if player A doesn't play well, then player B definitely will.
Yeah.
I just don't. I think that list is much shorter on the European side because it probably only falls a couple down where I'm confident that player steps in, because the rest is just a bit unknown based on form or experience at this level. Totally.
I think there are questions there in terms of I think there are a couple of questions in the US side in terms of depth. Wyndham Clark, Brian Harman, and JT are 3 that really jump out at me, but that leaves 9 other players, right?
Yeah.
Collectively on the European side, I've got questions: Bobby Mack, Sepp Straka, Horgaard, Shane Lowry to an extent, Ludwig Aberg. So all of a sudden we're down to 7, and those 2 points are what we're talking about here in terms of the gap. So I think that's totally fair. Where do you want to go next? What else have you got in your bag?
My only other question I had for you is, who do you think we'll be talking about because obviously we'll appear back in your ears next kind of Monday, Tuesday, looking back at the weekend, hopefully speaking about a European victory. But who do you think will be the player we're talking about in the review that surprises us in a good way? I don't want to talk about negatives. The surprises in a way that we possibly didn't expect on either side. I don't know if you need one from either, because I've got one clear one in mind.
Yep.
But just the player that you think on reflection will go, shit, he really turned up when I wasn't sure that he would.
I think I'm going to say, I'll say Ricky Fowler here for a reason, right?
It's a really good one.
I think Ricky has been and Jordan Spieth to a little element, but obviously their stories are largely similar. But Ricky's been so far in the wilderness and then has come back and gone so hard, so fast to get himself back into this side. Nearly won a major this year, has played outstanding golf. I just think picking up your point about Brooks Koepka before about what does this mean to him, I think this means everything to Ricky being a part of this team, right? Like we talk about Patrick Reed as Captain America. I reckon Ricky's filling that void this year, right? He loves these sort of events, these team events. So I genuinely think that he's going to be someone that will surprise us. Whether the moment does get too big for him or not, I don't know. But I think everything points to a really good showing from Ricky Fowler, and I think Zach Johnson is going to use him well. I don't think he's going to play every session, but I think he's going to use him well. I think he's a really versatile guy that they can pair him with multiple people. So I'll give you Ricky Fowler there because I think he's just worked so hard to get back into this environment, and I think this means something to him.
I think it's a great pick. I'd be shocked if Ricky Fowler plays any less than 3 matches. I really would. I don't think he's going to be
including singles.
Including singles, yeah. Yeah. So I think he's definitely not playing 5, but I think it's 3 or 4 because I absolutely think he'll go out Friday. I don't think it'll be Friday morning. I think it'll be Friday afternoon in the 4-ball. And then I think he plays definitely 1 on Saturday. Potentially how he goes on Friday will determine whether he plays 2. So he's not making up the numbers. He's there, and he wasn't on the bubble. Like he was 100 OP, always going to be in this team based on how he's played. To your point of what it means, I think if there'd been a little bit of doubt, all the stories we're hearing about Justin Thomas and waiting by the phone and texting Zach Johnson, that would have been Ricky Fowler, because that's what it means to him. That's what it means to him. And I think the final point that you made is really important about the void that he fills in the team. Were they to go on and win, I think inevitably, as the stories do start to filter out, in the post-analysis, as interviews are done on kind of the Monday and the Tuesday and the Wednesday, I have no doubt, are they to win, there'll be a myriad of stories of how important he was behind the scenes. Nothing to do with how he plays, but how important he was in terms of being the glue in that team. Because I am convinced that is the role that he's playing in that team this week.
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. Who are you saying is the talking point post?
So I think it'll be Ludwig Aberg. I think I heard Trevor Immelman, obviously major winner, previous international team captain. He's now one of the lead analysts on NBC. A tremendous golf brain. And I heard him do an interview earlier in the week where he described Ludwig Aberg as possibly already the best driver of the golf ball in the game.
It's a big call, Trev.
It's massive. It's massive. It's an enormous call. But
settle down, Trevor.
I think he's obviously, we've drawn previously the comparison to Rose Zhang, incredible college career, the first graduate of the PGA Tour U program. He's won already. In his first handful of starts. I think it was his sixth start. And to your point earlier, there's very little that seems to phase him. No moment's got big on him yet. Now, he's never played in a moment like this. I think it's really smart that they've debuted him at home, because I get the sense that crowd will pick him up and carry him.
Totally.
Both in good times and in bad. I just get the sense that, again, I don't anticipate seeing him on Friday. Maybe he sneaks out in the afternoon.
I reckon they get him out early.
You
get
reckon?
the nerves out. Just because, I think with some of these guys, it's like, hey, this is it. This is the Ryder Cup. And then it's like, actually, no, you got to wait another day. And it'll be like, shit, okay, got to sleep on it another night. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. Look, you're probably right. If he goes out, if he goes out Friday, then I think it is that Hovland pairing.
Yeah.
Because I can foresee a world in which that's a pairing that goes out in afternoon 4 ball, and then maybe Rahm is with Hatton in the morning in the foursomes. But I just think he's got the temperament. He's undoubtedly got the skill. He's got the length that will be super, super handy for a number of partners on this team. And I just get the sense that if the Europeans are to win, he will be a player that doesn't make an insignificant contribution to that. Yep. It might not be like, I don't think he's playing 4 games, and it might not be a 3-0. But I just reckon when I say significant contribution, maybe less to do with cumulative score, but more moments. I reckon you're going to find that there's 2 or 3 moments across the weekend where he rips a drive or puts an approach to 3 foot or gets up and down close. I think it's something a bit magnetic about him that draws him to big moments. And I anticipate if there is a European victory that he will have made a not insignificant contribution to that.
That's very fair. That's very fair. Who else you got? Anything else that you want to...
No, I'm really looking forward mainly to it being back on European soil. It's different. It's so different. Like Le Golf National was unbelievable. And obviously there was so many things, not least of which the Mollywood pairing, which kind of stole everyone's hearts across that. And I cannot wait for the Tommy.
Yes,
I think
chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's, to my understanding, it's the largest ever grandstand that's been built around a first tee at a Ryder Cup.
Awesome.
So I think it's well over 10,000 people around the first tee. So just imagine that, like when he walks out there with Rory McIlroy likely on the first morning, and the Tommy, or like it's just it hits different, and I'm so excited about that. They'll need it, and as I keep harping back on it, but 8 of the 12 Americans have never played a Ryder Cup on European soil. So that crowd will be critical, I think, in Europe's aspirations to be lifting this trophy on Sunday. But they're just better. Like, it take nothing away. There's been some incredible European victories. I was probably a little bit Nostradamus there, but there's been some incredible Ryder Cups on American soil, not least of which the European victory at Medina. But there's something special. I stumbled across the video today of was it Jose Maria Olazabal giving his victory speech as captain, and it's that they say some men die, not all men live. Giving his famous speech. It's just
so good.
It means something a little bit more, and the US could come in and piss all over that. There's no doubt in my mind that is an extreme possibility. But there's something about there's just something about a European team on European soil producing something special. And if that's to be the case, which I think it will be, it'll be something to behold.
Yeah. I think that's very well put. I think that's a great way to sum it up, to be honest, Marshy. I think, 15-13 is where you said it would land to Europe. I'm saying 16-12. I mean, there's a whole myriad of scores that could come out of this. But like I said nearly an hour ago, this is probably one of the most talked about Ryder Cups that I can remember for a variety of reasons in terms of the live and all that sort of shit. But I'm really looking forward to ultimately that first tee ball just being hit and kind of none of that matters, and we can just push on and start seeing some golf. Not sure what the time slot looks like. It probably won't be too bad for me over here. Maybe a little bit worse off for you, but yeah.
I think first sessions Friday, Saturday be great for me. You'll get a bit more of the second session depending on how a little sleep I intend to have. And then, we've got a public holiday here on Monday. So,
do you?
Yes. Well, it's actually now the King's birthday, which got shifted because we put it after the NRL Grand Final over here on the East Coast. So on the Monday after the NRL Grand Final. So Sunday singles, I'll probably be all the way through. So I have to go to work on Monday. So
beautiful. Well, we had ours last week. We had ours. Yes, we had ours yesterday. Yeah,
poorly timed in relation to the Ryder Cup. But look, friendly viewing time, particularly first sessions for those on the East Coast and those in the West. You should get most of it on all 3 nights. So best thing in golf, we'll certainly be back on Monday evening to review it all. Briefly before we go, it is Grand Final week.
Yes, for both codes.
Yeah, well, it's one of these special. It doesn't happen every year. Now, one of these special weekends where you've got Saturday AFL into Sunday NRL.
I don't love it, eh? I'm going to go against the grain, I think. I prefer dragging it out over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Personally.
I don't know. I think there's a case for both. I think living in a city that currently has 2 teams qualified through to each of the grand finals is unique. And I think in that sense, I'd almost tend to agree because I feel like both are entitled to and deserve their own spotlight. And it's difficult at
they're
the moment.
Fighting.
Yeah. Well, I think they're actually probably, and you and I have both lived in this space, they're probably actually doing quite a good job at collaborating and sharing. And to their credit, the Courier Mail, those in Queensland would know that to be the leading daily newspaper here in Queensland, are doing a good job. Like Mondays was front page Broncos, obviously, because it's a rugby league state, but back page Lions. And they kind of worked in the first 3 or 4 pages from the front and back were all Lions or all Broncos. So they've done it. I think they've done it well, but it's going to come down to the proof will be in the pudding on Saturday and Sunday, the coverage and how those things are covered, because obviously, Saturday is the grand final that Lions will be playing in, but there'll be a Saturday captain's run for the Broncos down at a core stadium in Sydney, and there'll be team news, and there'll be proof will be in the pudding on the weekend. But look, I probably do tend to agree in the sense that as a person who just loves grand final weeks, you'd love to see that stretch out over 2 weeks.
Yeah. Start with the NRL, Marshy. Start with the NRL. Talk to me here, because I guess, look, you're obviously a passionate Broncos man, and you probably converted me some, I don't know, 7 or 8 years when 7 or 8 years ago when we were working together, and I was fortunate to spend some time over there as well. Had some great times at the Caxton Hotel as well, so that's obviously helped. That's obviously helped the love for the Bronx. But I mean, it seems like it's one-way traffic at the moment for the Penrith Panthers. They seem like they're very hard to stop. Do the Bronx have a chance, Marshy? Because they've come back after what was a couple of lean years as well. They got dragged through the mud a little bit, and now they're back with a glow. So do they have a red hot chance, or is it a mere formality for the Panthers?
No, I think they're getting the Panthers at the right time. To three-peat in any code is incredibly challenging, and it's saved for the rarest of teams. I mean, obviously the Brisbane Lions back in
Hawthorn,
the early 2000s, your Hawks as well. So, and you don't often see it in rugby league. The drop off is stark. There aren't premiership windows in league as there are in AFL. Although that's increasingly less frequent anyway these days in Australian rules. But I think they're getting Penrith at the right time in the sense that there'll be no harder premiership for Penrith to win than this grand final, just on where they are in the trajectory. I think the opposition that they face, the Broncos are in great form. And to your point, it has been lean. Like, this is the first Broncos grand final that they've contested since 2015. They haven't won a premiership since 2006. So, people say, we've probably got some St Kilda supporters listening to this podcast saying, fucking woe is me since 2006. But, it was 6 premierships from 1980 through 2006, and we haven't seen one since in Brisbane. So this is undoubtedly, and it's not taking away from the Lions, but this is a rugby league city, and there's something a little bit special about, thousands and thousands of people down at Red Hill for training. Yesterday for the open training session for the Bronx, and I think they've got is key positional players in red hot form. There's no better fullback in the game at the moment than Reece Walsh. His performance in the preliminary final against the Warriors was outstanding. Adam Reynolds has been a cool head amongst a young group. He's been exceptional leading the team, but also at halfback. He's playing inside a 20-year-old in Ezra Mam, who's playing out of his skin. And they're just running behind a big forward pack. Led by Paddy Carrigan, Payne Haas, Tommy Flegler, Jordan Ricker. Like, they're in good form, mate. Like, I think it's going to be difficult to go down to Sydney and get it done. It's like it is in the AFL. The grand finals played in Sydney. It wouldn't matter if it was, Bronx Cowboys, the Bronx Titans, the Bronx Dolphins. We play it in Sydney. So tough to go down there in front of all the Penrith Panthers fans, but I think the Broncos are coming in good form off a great win against the Warriors. Panthers are a bit banged up. A couple of players, important players for them coming in sore, which is not unusual at this time of year, but it won't be. I can tell you right now, the Broncos won't be winning 42-12 as they did in the semi-final. It'll be a physical game. Tone will be set in the first 15, 20 minutes. And if Brisbane can weather the physicality and weather the defensive press in that first kind of 20, 25 minutes and get out, ahead, or at least, only a score behind, then I think that they'll probably run out the game better than Penrith. So, fascinating game, mate. I do hope a lot of long-suffering Broncos fans who went through some lean years up here, as you say. So, for the sake of the city, it'll light the city up. Caxton will be absolutely feral on Sunday evening if Brisbane win.
I tell you what, I've got a good friend's wedding on Saturday, grand final day, over here.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, a Kiwi and a Scot getting married, so that's what happens.
They'll say it's all right. We'll be wrapped up. We'll get the All Blacks on 4:30 tomorrow morning for the Rugby World Cup. Don't worry about it.
Well, I think there's that's obviously, I wouldn't rather be anywhere else. But I tell you what, given that I don't really give a shit about, Collingwood or Brisbane, all in all, I tell you what, there's almost no other place I'd rather be than the Caxton Street Hotel on Sunday Arvo, I reckon. So I reckon that would be a lot of fun.
The precinct will be absolutely heaving. It's a nighttime grand final in the NRL, so by the time kickoff rolls around, 7:30ish, you'll be on heaving. Yeah.
All right, AFL. What's your? I've probably got more of an input here than I did on the
Well, yeah.
NRL.
Why don't you lead us off? Because I've waxed lyrical on the NRL Grand Final. We can both talk to this, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think firstly, I reckon out of you is I'd like to get your take on Melbourne as well, because they're unbelievably disappointing in their two finals and out in straight sets for the second straight year. They arguably probably should have beaten Carlton all in all. They just couldn't kick the ball through the fucking big posts. I think once Collingwood, I know a lot of people were cheering for the Giants on Friday night. I was kind of low key going for Collingwood. You would have been on the Giants.
Oh, massively. Yeah.
I just for the reason that Collingwood have been the best team all year. They deserve to be in the grand final. What they bring is enormous. And then regardless of who won out of Carlton and Brisbane, it was a win. It was a win for footy fans, right? Because Collingwood and Carlton, the oldest rivalry in the game, unbelievable. Would have been amazing. They would have been hanging off the light poles at the MCG. And Collingwood and Brisbane, which is what we've got, you got the best team and arguably the second best team, or in the top three best teams all year. So I think it's a great grand final. It's hard to see Collingwood getting beaten in Melbourne. If this game was played at the Gabba, pen me in for a Lions win. I think there's pros and cons against both. Collingwood, some could argue they played their grand final last week. Very physical match against the Giants. Lions got away with a little bit easier after Carlton pumped the brakes from quarter time onwards. But yeah, I think it's what neutral footy fans probably deserve out of this year. I think it's the two most exciting teams who have hit their straps and been consistent all year. And I think it's going to be a belting game. But overall, I think Collingwood are just going to be that stronger team in Melbourne. Probably win by 3 or 4 goals, all in all. As much as I would love to see Brisbane win, because I do, I got a bit of a soft spot for Brisbane. I think they're, they were the team when I was, when I was 8 or 9 years old, and they were going on their run of winning
formative
three.
Years.
Watching Michael Voss and Simon Black and Sean Hart and Daniel Bradshaw and Alistair Lynch and all of these guys running around it. They were a phenomenal football team. So I think everyone's got a bit of a soft spot for Brisbane, and I think they're going to have a lot of fans on Saturday. I would dare say. So,
not least of which the Fitzroy crew, who is a special day for them. Look, I tend to agree. Let me attack this chronologically. I was shattered to see a second consecutive straight sets exit for the Demons. I think all things being equal, they should have beaten Collingwood the week before. They should have been playing Carlton, to be honest. And they should have put themselves through to a game against GWS at the MCG and probably been playing this weekend. But, chickens came home to roost. Kicking and forward line inefficiency has been an issue all year. And it's something that hasn't been addressed. It was probably addressed briefly with Harrison Petty going on a great run and probably turning himself into a forward and then getting injured. And then, we throw in Tom McDonald, who I love Team Mac, but he was past it after he won a grand final 2 years ago. So Melbourne have got a lot of work to do to address stuff in the forward 50 over the off-season and cannot waste another year, because Gawn's a year older, May's over 30. They've got a lot of good young talent, but they also got some aging guys who are critical to the team. So that's Melbourne. Yeah. My concern for Collingwood is there is no way known they win this grand final on the weekend kicking 60 points, which is what they've done in their two finals to get through. No way known. Like, you just will not beat Brisbane kicking 60 points. I don't think Brisbane are going to run up a score on them, because, Darcy Moore is far too good, and he's so well supported by, Quaynor is a freak.
Yeah,
he's so good, and well supported down the back there as well. But they're going to have to kick some scores. It's made more difficult with McStay going out and what they do in that space, because I don't think they can replace him. Like, they cannot put Ginnivan in because they need a tall. Like that second tall is critical for my check to play the role he plays. And they've already got, like, they've got Hill, they've got McCreary, they've got Elliott. I think that's a real strength for them, because I think they've got leg speed in the forward 50 that's going to worry Brisbane. Yep. Brisbane are great when it's balls coming in for a Harris Andrews. And, Kitty Coleman was exceptional for the halfback flank, but that's because the team had momentum when they arrested it back from Carlton. So he did have the freedom to walk off players and run the ball off halfback. So I think that leg speed, the runners that Collingwood have in the forward 50 will worry Brisbane a bit. I just don't know if they can, you can only go on what they've seen in the last 2 weeks of finals, and it's been games built on, we're just going to lock you down and you're not scoring more than 60 points. I don't think they'll have that freedom against Brisbane. Realistically, if Brisbane, the biggest question that Chris Fagan has to answer is who goes to De Goey. Because if De Goey's let off the leash like he has been in the last 2 weeks, particularly last week, GWS had no answers for him. He was immaculate last week. So whether it's Dunkley, or who did a great job on Cripps last week, whether it's McCluggage, who's gone to De Goey before, but you just got to lock up De Goey, because if they don't lock up De Goey, I think it's funny, right? And I won't overstate this too much, because I know he's come back from injury, but Dacos has been relatively quiet. He'll get better with games, but it's as tale as old as time that in the big games, your very best players step up. And that's not to say Nick Dacos isn't in the top 3 players at Collingwood, but he is a second-year player still cutting his teeth. And De Goey is an out-and-out bull for them. And when it's mattered, in the 2 games they've needed someone, it hasn't been Dacos off the halfback flank. It's been De Goey in the middle. And totally. So if Brisbane don't have an answer for that, then it probably won't matter, because Collingwood will run up a score. Because if De Goey's allowed to run rampant in the middle and deliver it in at will, he'll find a way, because you'll find Bobby Hill in space, you'll find McCreary in space, you'll find Elliott in space, and if you don't, my check will throw his hands up, and maybe whether it's Frampton who gets a gig or Mason Cox runs forward and pops himself and takes a contested mark. So, I think it'll be a great game. If Collingwood find a way to score, 80, 90 points, then I think they're almost home. But that's my only concern is their ability. Not my concern. I actually couldn't give 2 shits if they win. Yeah. But I think that's, if you're a Collingwood fan, that's a concern, because Brisbane are white hot at the moment with the ball in hand.
They are. Well, looping it all back to golf, it'll be Hayden Barron will be cheering on his pies as well, I'm sure.
Yes.
So I've seen him. He was over there recently. I think I saw a photo from there today. So hopefully for Baz they get up, but it'll be interesting to watch come grand final days, which will be nice. I'm excited by
that.
And
the beauty about it is Saturday you can roll. I mean, not you personally because you'll be at a wedding, but you can roll straight from the grand final pretty much into Ryder Cup coverage.
Yes, you can.
And then for those who are NRL fans, it's probably the dual screen that you'll have operating on Sunday evening. Totally right. So I'm sure we'll reserve a few minutes on Monday evening to talk about the grand finals, but most of it will be our look back at the Ryder Cup. And of course, as you said at the very beginning of the episode, Druids, the Australian season gets underway. I was going to say we're over in your neck of the woods as it relates to state borders, because obviously Kalgoorlie is far from your neck of the woods.
We got Joondalup first.
Sorry,
WA Open first, so that's good for me. I'll be up there. I'm going to try and get out there a couple of days and check out the action. I was talking to our good friend Ron Chopper today, and we were just discussing how it's not great for patrons going out there and viewing.
I was going to say, you tailed me up around that course.
I did
once upon a time, and my memories of it, other than being it's a lovely track, but I was certainly glad by the end of the 18 holes that we took the cart, because I wasn't walking that. And therefore, I can't imagine it's. I don't know where you're going to You're probably it's going to be one of those situations where you probably have to perch yourself in one spot and watch groups come through.
I think you're going to have to pick a group and just follow. I don't think there's many places where you can really perch up. And we didn't actually play we played. We probably played the hilliest 9, and then the other 9 that we didn't play, the Quarry 9. That's hillier than than the one that we did play. So they're playing the June Quarry 18, which is an excellent combination of 18 holes. They're already getting the preparations in tip-top shape. I tried to get out there on Thursday this week, and they said, no, you cannot come on the golf course because
that's a no.
We don't want people like you hacking it up. So I would suggest it's probably open for member play only. But yeah, that's WA Open full preview coming next week, which will be exciting.
And we're underway then. Obviously, we've got a handful of tournaments in the West.
Yeah.
And then it begins in earnest. So looking forward to, as we said, we'll do a review of the Ryder Cup, and we'll also have a preview of the WA Open as the first major tournament of the Australian summer in earnest next week. So plenty of listening coming for you next week, Drews.
Absolutely. I'm pumped for it. Ryder Cup, 16-12 Europe for me, 15-13 for Marshy. I'm looking forward to a massive weekend of sport, KM.
And I'm hoping to be opening next Monday night's review show with Tommy, Fleetwood. That's how we'll do it. All right,
That's
Drews,
all right.
a wonderful weekend. Enjoy it, mate.